Welcome to the Golden Mind podcast, where wisdom, faith, and business strategies meet. Join your hosts, David and Grace, as they explore the powerful insights of Myron Golden through a biblical lens. This is the Golden Mind podcast.
Okay, so we're back, and we're diving deeper into Myron Golden.
Yeah.
And we're building on what we talked about in terms of people skills.
Absolutely, yeah. Building on that foundation of character, communication, and compassion.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about Myron Golden is how he takes these really core elements and applies them to this whole concept of Solomon's business plan.
Right.
Which is, it's really intriguing, and it's something we're going to unpack today and, see how it connects with some of those Christian principles around, finances, stewardship, and all that.
Wealth and faith, and yeah.
Yeah, so for this deep dive, we're working with transcripts from 2 of his YouTube videos, People Skills That Can Make You Millions, and Solomon's Business Plan.
Okay, cool.
So one of the things that kind of jumps out right away with Myron Golden is that he has this very practical view of the Bible.
Yeah.
It's not just a book of stories for him, it's like an instruction manual.
It's applicable, right?
Yeah, it's applicable to every area of life, including business.
Yeah, he even goes so far as to say that he believes that God put a business model in the Bible through the story of King Solomon.
Right, and what's really compelling is he shares his own personal story about how in 2014, he experienced a financial turnaround, and he attributes it directly to discovering these biblical principles.
That's powerful.
Yeah, so it's not just theory for him, it's like lived experience.
Right.
And, he even talks about Solomon in a way that's kind of refreshing because he doesn't present him as this perfect figure.
Yeah, that's true.
Like we tend to think of these biblical figures as flawless, but he acknowledges that Solomon wasn't perfect. He was a product of David and Bathsheba's very complicated relationship.
Right. He had an interesting start.
He did, yeah. And I think that's actually very encouraging because it means that success based on God's principles isn't reserved for those who had like a perfect past or, come from this ideal background.
And it's available to anyone.
Yeah. And he even has this quote. He says, "You may come from a home where your parents concluded that they made a mistake. You ain't a mistake. God don't make mistakes."
I love that.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And, it reminds us that, where we start doesn't have to dictate where we end up.
Yeah, and I think that's a message that so many people need to hear, because we can get so caught up in our past and let it hold us back.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that people often question about Solomon is his marriage to Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, historically, we know that was a political alliance.
Right.
But Golden sees it from a business perspective.
Yeah, he interprets it as this strategic partnership.
To secure peace.
Exactly. And when you think about it, from a business standpoint, that kind of partnership could have provided some serious advantages.
Oh, yeah. Access to trade routes.
Yeah.
Resources, maybe even shared knowledge.
Right. It really makes you think about those strategic alliances in our own lives and businesses.
Absolutely. Who could we partner with that could help us to accelerate our growth or expand our reach?
And he uses this really great analogy.
Yeah.
He talks about the difference between an unknown person offering a coaching program and someone like Damon John or Oprah offering the same program.
Right.
And, the core offering might be the same, but the reputation, the influence behind the person making the offer is what changes everything.
Huge difference.
Right. It really highlights the importance of becoming that person that people say yes to, even before they know the full details of what you're offering.
And that really ties back to what we were talking about with people skills.
Mm-hmm.
Building that character, becoming trustworthy.
Yeah, being someone people want to work with.
Exactly.
And it reminds me of, how Jesus just said, "Follow me."
Yeah, so simple yet so powerful.
Right. It wasn't a detailed business plan or anything. It was just the power of who he was.
Yeah, and that's what Golden emphasizes, focusing on our own personal growth.
Right, becoming more.
Yeah, so we can say less.
And that comes from, serving others, loving people. Another key element that Golden points to is what he calls Solomon's powerful passion for God. And he actually quotes Deuteronomy 6.5, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength."
And he presents that as a business secret almost.
Right. It's like this foundational principle.
Right, like don't compartmentalize your faith.
Yeah, it should inform everything we do.
Including our work.
Absolutely. And this leads into what he talks about as patterning after a father.
Okay.
And he explains how Solomon walked in the statutes of his father David. And then he goes into this interesting interpretation of the Hebrew word for father, Abba, which he says means olive bait.
Olive bait.
Yeah, and essentially he's saying that it represents God in the house, the father as God's representative, provider, protector, that kind of thing.
I see.
So he's encouraging us to find mentors, to find people who represent God in our areas of interest, and to follow their pattern.
That's a powerful idea.
Yeah.
Finding those godly role models in our field.
Yeah, and, allowing them to speak into our lives.
Right. Being accountable to them.
Now, this next point I think is really significant. He talks about premium price for total sacrifice.
Okay.
And he uses the example of Solomon offering 1,000 burnt offerings in Gibeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and he presents this as a picture of total surrender.
Right. Holding nothing back.
Right. It's like saying, I'm not keeping any of this for myself. It's all yours.
And that reminds me of Romans 12:1-2, where it talks about offering our bodies as living sacrifices.
Exactly. It's that idea of complete devotion and surrender to God's purposes.
Right.
And Golden makes this connection that it was this incredible act of sacrifice that paved the way for Solomon to receive that extraordinary attention and favor from God.
So our willingness to give our all can lead to greater blessings.
Exactly. It's not about trying to manipulate God with offerings. It's about a heart posture of complete devotion.
Yeah.
And you know what happens after that? God appears to Solomon in a dream and offers him anything he desires.
And what does Solomon ask for?
He doesn't ask for riches or a long life. He asks for an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil.
Wow. So he's asking for wisdom.
Yeah, wisdom for service.
That's amazing.
It really highlights that focus on God's purpose rather than personal gain.
He's thinking about his responsibility to lead and serve the people.
Right, and Golden puts it in these really modern terms. He says it's like Solomon saying, Dear Lord, give me the wisdom to do the thing you put me on this earth to do in a way that pleases you and serves the people you put me here to serve.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so clear, and it emphasizes that, our fundamental purpose is to please God and to serve others.
Right.
And it's so incredible because Solomon's wisdom and wealth ultimately flowed from this selfless request.
It's like he got the blessings because he wasn't focused on the blessings themselves.
Right, he was focused on fulfilling God's purpose.
So God granted him that wisdom and understanding that he asked for.
Yeah, and the Bible even tells us that his wisdom surpassed all others, even Ethan the Ezrahite and Heman Kalkul and Darda.
Those are some names.
I know, right? But it just shows that his wisdom was unmatched and his fame spread to all the nations.
And I think that reinforces the principle that when we prioritize God's kingdom and the well-being of others,
Right.
he often blesses us in ways that we couldn't even imagine.
Absolutely. And this leads to another important point, creating content that helps.
Okay.
Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005.
He was prolific.
He was. And Golden connects this to the modern idea of creating valuable content like social media posts or videos and things that genuinely help people.
Right, provide solutions.
Yeah, Golden calls it community service content. And he emphasizes that it should be so valuable that people would be willing to pay for it even if you initially give it away for free.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's about demonstrating your wisdom and your ability to help, just like Solomon did with his proverbs and songs.
Okay, so it's about building trust and establishing your value before you ask for a transaction.
Exactly. Now let's get into the specifics of what Golden calls Solomon's business plan. He breaks it down into 3 key components. The first one is consultant to contemporaries, which he also refers to as kings.
Okay.
Essentially, Solomon, being a king himself and renowned for his wisdom, advised other rulers on how to govern their kingdoms.
So in today's world, that would be like offering your expertise to your peers or others in your industry.
Exactly. And Golden uses his own experience as an example.
Yeah.
He consults in business sales and marketing using biblical principles.
Right.
And he points to the story of the Queen of Sheba coming to Solomon for advice.
Oh, yeah.
And the gifts she brought him were just immense, 120 talents of gold.
I mean, that's a huge amount.
It is, and some estimates put the modern-day value of that at hundreds of millions of dollars.
Just for one consulting client.
Yeah, so it really highlights the high value that was placed on Solomon's counsel.
Right, and it emphasizes the importance of providing real value.
Yeah, Golden makes the point that the value you offer must justify the cost.
And he uses the example of Omar, who invested in Golden's King Solomon's court coaching program.
Right. And Omar saw his business revenue jump from $250,000 to $1.2 million.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, and not only that, but his giving increased significantly as well.
So his success wasn't just financial, it was holistic.
Exactly. It was about impacting his entire life.
And I think that's really important to remember. True success encompasses more than just our bank accounts.
Absolutely. Okay, so the second part of Solomon's model is communicator to crowds, which Golden also calls seminars.
Good.
Solomon couldn't personally advise everyone, so he would address large gatherings and share his wisdom that way.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and this is like the ancient equivalent of modern seminars and conferences.
Right, leveraging your expertise to reach a wider audience.
Exactly. And the Bible even mentions that people would pay to hear Solomon's wisdom.
Oh, wow. So they saw the value in what he had to offer.
Yeah, they would bring him gifts, vessels of silver and vessels of gold and garments and armor and spices and horses and mules.
Quite the collection.
Right. It wasn't just about receiving information. It was a clear exchange of value.
And that reminds me of how, Golden himself generates a significant amount of revenue through his events.
Exactly. It just shows that the principle still applies today.
Okay, so what's the third component?
The third one is continuity cash flow, which he also calls annual offerings.
Interesting.
Yeah, the scripture talks about how people would bring Solomon their presents a rate year by year.
So it was consistent.
Exactly. And Golden connects this to the modern business idea of recurring revenue models.
Like subscriptions or memberships.
Right. And he uses his own coaching programs as an example.
So it's about creating that consistent, predictable income stream.
Yeah. And Golden makes the point that we don't need to try and reinvent the wheel.
If it worked for Solomon, it can work for us.
Right. And all of this really points to this idea of cultivating a mindset of abundance.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, Golden challenges the idea that offering things for free is always the best approach.
Interesting, because I think a lot of people operate from that perspective.
Yeah, but he suggests that it can sometimes devalue your offering and even disempower the recipient.
I see.
He believes that when people make a significant investment, it can actually unlock greater creativity and commitment.
Makes sense. It shows they're serious.
Right, and it also shifts their perception of what's possible.
Yeah, and I think that's where the mindset of abundance comes in.
Exactly. It's about believing that there's more than enough to go around.
And that we can achieve great things through God's principles.
Right, and Golden's own aspiration for greater financial impact. He was really inspired by his mentors.
Yeah.
And it shows that, we shouldn't be limited by scarcity.
Right. We can embrace the potential for abundance.
But always with a focus on service.
Right.
And this all comes back to, what we've been talking about. God has put us here to please him and to serve others.
Just like Solomon.
Exactly. It's about embracing that purpose and trusting that God's principles will lead us to both impact and abundance.
You know what I find so compelling about Golden's interpretation of Solomon's story? Is how he seamlessly blends these practical business strategies with deep Christian principles.
Right. It's not just about making money. It's about aligning our faith with our work.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes his message so powerful.
So to recap our deep dive into Solomon's business plan, we've looked at 3 key components.
Okay, remind me.
Consultant to contemporaries, communicator to crowds, and continuity cash flow.
Right.
And these strategies are built on those core Christian principles: faith in God's word, seeking wisdom for the purpose of serving others.
Right, and prioritizing pleasing God and serving people.
Yeah, that's the foundation for true success and lasting abundance.
I love it.
So for our call to action, we really encourage you to take some time to reflect on these principles.
Yeah.
How can you apply them in your own life?
In your own kingdom, as Golden would say.
Exactly. And, how can you cultivate more of that Solomon mindset?
Yeah, and that leads me to a final thought for our listeners. What if the energy that we spend worrying about our finances could be redirected towards understanding and applying God's principles of abundance and service?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah, could that shift in focus lead to those unexpected and transformative results that we see in Solomon's story?
It's something worth considering.
Definitely food for thought.
Okay, well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining David and Grace on the Golden Mind podcast. If you enjoyed today's deep dive, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs a dose of wisdom, faith, and strategy. Until next time, as Myron often says, stay blessed by the best.